Hello, my name is Glenn Gottlieb. I'm proud to be the chair of the mediation section of the Beverly Hills Bar Association. The mediation section has just been working on a project of which you're about to see the very first session, and it's a podcast series called Mediators Talk. It's being hosted by Carina Tăutu, who's a member of our executive committee. I hope you'll find it informative. I'm proud to be the first interviewee, and I hope you'll enjoy the podcast series and watch the rest. Thank you very much for watching.
Hello, this is the Mediators Talk, a Beverly Hills Bar Association podcast, and I'm Carina Rosanna Tăutu, your host. And it's my pleasure to introduce for our first episode, Mr. Glenn Gottlieb. Glenn is our chair of the mediation section. And how are you, Glenn?
Fine, thank you. Nice to be here with you, Carina.
Thank you. It's a funny time in the world to start a podcast on mediation and peacemaking. This is our ambition. And, I was just thinking this morning that it took quite a while to take this off the ground, and you were so instrumental in helping us doing it. You're basically the mastermind behind it. But the world is basically, we're in the middle of a pandemic, a second lockdown in Europe. We had a summer of social unrest, high conflict presidential election, and the new nomination of the Supreme Court. So I wonder, if you would like to talk to us a little bit about the importance of mediation and why you supported this podcast. I'm very grateful for, your involvement and basically your passion for it. And I would like everybody to know about it.
Well, that's very kind of you. We're very pleased and proud that you come up with this idea, and we've been happy to sponsor it. I think in terms of mediation, just because we're in this pandemic doesn't mean that humans aren't interacting with each other. And unfortunately, when humans interact, there's conflict sometimes. So the need for mediation, in my opinion, hasn't lessened. It may have moved or changed a little bit as circumstances have changed. But the need for peacemaking and trying to bring people together and reduce conflict and make peace, I don't think there's no change there, no less now than it was before.
That's totally right. So Glenn, you have 40 years of business and transactional law experience behind you. And for the past 15 years, you've been mediating. I'm curious what made you switch to mediation? And again, what triggered that passion for it?
It's interesting. As a transactional lawyer, I think most of us aren't that familiar. We obviously know what litigation is, but we don't know too much about alternative dispute resolution. We've heard the terms arbitration and so forth. But as it happens, I was the chair of the nominating committee of a local nonprofit legal services organization, and we were interviewing a young lawyer for membership on our board. And he was talking about himself making the transition from being a litigator to mediating. And I became curious about what it was all about. We had some discussions. And what appealed to me was that the essence of the mediation process was very similar to the types of work that I was doing as a transactional lawyer, working with people, advising, counseling, and negotiating in particular, which I very much enjoyed. So I did a little more research. I took some classes and just added that as an adjunct to my practice and just became enthralled with it. I not only liked the process itself, the intellectual challenge of it, the emotional feeling of well-being, participating with the people in it, and particularly just philosophically, the idea of peacemaking and trying to reduce conflict in the world and between parties is very attractive to me. So I took to it very quickly, and I've not looked back.
It's very interesting because I think all people in mediation were like natural peacemakers, but somehow today we have this perception that, peacemaker is not like someone very competitive or very aggressive in business, and you come from business, right? You come from that world. And I wonder, how can we switch the perception? One of the reasons behind this podcast, and that was my drive to initiate this, is how can we, I would say, maybe ambitiously, change the archetype of the peacemaker back to what it is, right? And I wonder if you would like to comment, and what's your vision for the future of mediation, and how can we make people understand the importance of it?
Well, I think one of the problems really has become a little bit the toxic political environment that we've been involved in, and the intransigence to a certain extent of some of our political leaders, and giving a bad feeling to the idea of compromise. And in litigation, as I got into it a little bit, as I was becoming a lawyer, I saw it starting to work that way as well, that people felt that digging their heels in, that you couldn't represent your client unless you were extremely aggressive and difficult to work with, which I really thought, was sort of antithetical to the idea of resolving whatever issues it was that was between the people who are adversary to each other. So, I think it's important that those of us who believe in a collaborative model as opposed to a combative model need to start moving the idea away that if you're negotiating with somebody and compromising, that doesn't mean that you're being weak. In fact, if you're going to make a deal, you have to come a little way toward the other side. You can't just dig in and say it's my way or the highway, because then the other side just says, well, fine, I'll see you in court. And the parties end up spending tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to get to a resolution. And if they had just collaborated with each other, our goal as peacemakers and mediators is to try to create, if not a win-win situation, at least not a lose-lose situation where hundreds of thousands of dollars are spent on litigation to come to a conclusion that the parties might have come to themselves, or they might have come to an even better resolution themselves if they had just cooperated with each other a little bit.
I like to say that, kind is the new strong. I would like to have that on a t-shirt.
Kind is not equated with weak.
Yeah. And it's interesting you said combat versus compromise. And I just learned a few days ago from your bio that you're a martial artist. You basically did something that's amazing. You have a 2nd-degree black belt in Krav Maga. Can you talk a little bit about that, your passion for it, and how maybe that kind of, trickles into mediation and your passion for mediation? Because I'm sure it does.
I would say to a certain extent. Well, Krav Maga, we put it with martial arts just because people understand it a little better, but it's not really very arty, to be honest. It's the self-defense and combat, hand-to-hand combat system of the Israeli military. It was really developed at a time when Israel was just forming the state, and they needed a system that was easy to learn, but that could be used by, really civilians, because as many people know, everyone goes into the Israeli army. It's not selected for just the most athletic or strong people. So it needed to be a system that was easy and people could use it, but that it was effective. And Krav Maga's philosophy is really, if you can avoid a fight, avoid it. Our first principle is if you can run, run. I mean, anybody can land a lucky punch. And so when you get into a fighting situation, there's always a risk and a danger there, no matter how big or how skillful you are. But if you do have to get into a fight, then you should obviously use all the tools that you have to be effective in defending yourself. And sometimes the best defense is a good offense. So Krav Maga is very, very aggressive when it has to be. So I think for myself, I'm not very large of stature, quite honestly, and I'm a decent athlete, but I'm not a great athlete. But to have the foundation and the confidence that I can protect myself if I have to. I've frankly never had to use it except to have it in the back of my mind. I've had a few confrontations over the years, and I think I've just projected enough confidence with the other person at not, backing down, that I've really avoided any situations where I've had to use it. except in the gym. So, and I think that's, somewhat true in a mediation. Again, you can project confidence in your position, but willing to compromise. And if you have to fight, you have that in your back pocket, but hopefully you don't, and you can come to a resolution with the other party, or vice versa, that resolves the conflict, and both sides, they may not get everything they want, or they may have to give away something that they really preferred not to, but the alternative is worse. So, resolve it in a way that both sides can walk away, if not completely happy, at least satisfied. And it's also a resolution that they've agreed to themselves, not one that's been imposed upon them.
That's correct. And I feel like, in the animal kingdom, I think recently you might have seen this, there was circulating, there was this video circulating of, it was a bobcat, I think. Have you seen it? And there was one guy in Utah who was basically filming how the bobcat attacked him. But actually, the bobcat was a mother protecting her young. And she never scratched him. She was very aggressive, but never really, kind of consummating the fight. And everybody was talking first like, oh, this is so scary. But at the same time, it was a mother protecting her young and just putting enough pressure, right, to keep things at peace, strangely enough. But we are taking this, I think sometimes too seriously. We take our role of an aggressor to an extreme. And I wonder, what's the advice for you for attorneys who would like to go into mediation, but they're afraid of this kind of stigma that's weak to mediate? Because I heard that. I just came out of school, right? So I heard things. And, I wonder, what would you say to a younger attorney who is in doubt to become a mediator, to actually take that position?
Well, I think there's, really a difference between if you're going to be a litigator or if you want to be a mediator as a profession. As a young lawyer, to me, I think it might take a little more experience because I know that when I went into mediation, I was already a 25-year lawyer, and the experience in the real world, particularly as a transactional lawyer, was very helpful to me in helping parties reach a resolution. In part, the question is whether you want to be a fighter and resolve your conflicts that way, or understand that collaborating and negotiating can be, a different way to go. I think that participating in a mediation, there are some questions, maybe that's what you're more referring to, in terms of whether that indicates weakness or not. I think, again, we see this on the international scene with politicians, where those who make alliances and negotiate with their enemies, as a famous politician once said, you don't have to negotiate with your friends or make peace with your friends. But making war is extremely costly on both sides, and the same is true, obviously, of litigation. So you can project strength while negotiating, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's everything right with that. You can stand up for your side, but understand that there's a point of view on both sides, and the idea is to understand the point of view of the person on the other side, potentially view them as an adversary, but not someone that you have to beat down into submission, but someone that you hopefully want to be able to collaborate with so that both sides can achieve their ultimate goals and peace, or in the case of litigation, a resolution that both sides can live with.
It's interesting. I'm Romanian born, and I've been through a revolution. I had a bullet over my head, and I've seen a lot of tensions. I lived through the 80s where times were very dark, but it's very easy to go in conflict. It's very easy to cut off and say, we're going to do this, like the Balkan Wars, right? The Serbians and the Croats, they got basically the guts of Europe, we had this war that was so surprising in 20th century at the end of it. And I'm still I think we're probably never going to get rid of the combat mentality, but we probably can collaborate more of us towards peace. And I went over a couple of quotes about peace, and one stuck with me. It's Lao Tzu, who says that if you are at peace, you are living in the present. And I feel like the mediator, do you see a mediator like trying to pull people being more present? Do you feel like your role is kind of facilitating something like that?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think to me it's more an issue. You know, when you were speaking about the wars and so forth, and the easy manner in which we click into an aggressive posture when we're faced with an adversarial situation. You know, we've had millions of years as human beings. It's been fashionable recently to talk about our lizard brain. You know, and that's the part of our brain that's developed over millions and millions of years, whereas our more human thinking brain in our cerebral cortex, that's, you know, maybe a few 100,000 years. So yes, it is easier to slip into that fight, flight, or freeze brain of ours, and there's no room there for thinking because you're in a survival situation and you've got to act quickly, and so your decisions are reduced to those three things. What used to be either fight or fright or flight, and now we've added kind of freeze. But my job, as I see it more, is to try to get the situation calmed down a little bit and reduce the tension in the room, so that people can feel like their very survival is not at stake, and we can reach then, and we can help people get to their frontal cortex, the cerebral cortex, the thinking brain, which is what really makes us human and distinguishes us, and allows us to seek options and consider other solutions to the conflict that we're in that don't involve fighting and beating your opponent or getting beaten up. The essential thing about mediation that's great is that, unlike in a courtroom, it's not about determining who's right or who's wrong, or necessarily who wins or who loses. It's about resolving the matter, and neither side has to admit one way or another, right, wrong, or win, lose. It's about coming to a solution, and that's a much more human thing that involves many more options than just just that lizard brain solution of I'm going to fight, bring out the claws.
With all your experience, I'm really curious, what do you want to see happening so mediation has a little bit more weight and attention? As I mentioned before, like, we have this election that's highly divisive, right? The politicians want, last couple of years were terrible. We have a terrible social unrest, and justifiably so. Like, we needed to have these issues coming up. And I think mediators are so needed. However, I heard people not long ago, like, not being even aware that for a divorce you can access a mediator. So I wonder, what do you think we need to do more so people are aware and kind of come to this profession or practice it better? I'm just curious, what's your vision for the future of mediation?
Well, it's an interesting question. This may sound like a rather strange analogy, but I think in some respect, it may be a little bit like email. 10 years ago, nobody even knew what that was, or maybe people in the, very high tech world, or, the nerds. When I was growing up, being a nerd wasn't particularly fashionable. But, at a certain point, whether it was 10 years ago, 7 years ago, a few people were using email and other people were adopting it. And all of a sudden, it sort of hit this tipping point, to use another trendy term. And then, boy, everybody was using it, or text messages, the same thing. You know, it was just a few kids at one point, and then we were all doing it. And I think to a certain extent, mediation may be that way. The more we engage in it, the more we get out the word, the more litigators understand that it's a practical and effective way of resolving disputes, and it makes their clients happier in the end. That at a certain point, you know, whether that's, I mean, it's already achieved huge strides from where it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And I just think it'll continue to increase in sort of a snowball, you know, rolling down the hill. And at some point, everybody will just understand, you know, that's, everybody will do it. You know, everybody's doing it. And it'll become a common part of the process. I think it's getting toward that now. So it just needs to, you know, we need to keep heading in that same direction.
It's an interesting time. And I was also thinking like, wow, what a time to launch this, because the mental health of everybody is affected by the lockdowns. And I think what I saw for me in what I saw in law school, coming from the arts, right? Because I'm a filmmaker. It was pretty shocking because everybody was like in this combative mode and the tension was very high. You know, people preparing for the bar exam, they were like, it reminded me of high school when I didn't know how to regulate my emotions very well. And I was like, this is unnecessary. Like the tension and the pressure we're putting on ourselves, it's so disproportionate. And I feel like mediators have this skill, right? To kind of bring things down a little and level it and bring peace. That's what we are. We're peacemakers. So I hope that we can contribute through the profession more to like the overall, you know, well-being of everyone. Would you have any advice for attorneys and mediators, because there are two sides of it, to collaborate better and kind of understand each other better? I've seen some interesting mediation, for example, when the adversary were mediating at EEOC, and this attorney, an in-house attorney, came and he was super aggressive. And by the end of it, he basically hugged us as he was like, oh, now I'm converted to mediation. Miracles happen. But I wonder, you know, what's your advice for like a better collaboration between the two systems that seem at odds, but actually they're made to work together, right?
Yeah, you know, I just think that the more people understand that litigation or the trial system is a means of dispute resolution, you know, and I think that's true of our clients as well. In a certain way, I think it's difficult that we've all grown up thinking that our American trial system is supposed to achieve justice, you know, this high ideal with a capital J, and achieve truth, you know, with a capital T. But as in most things in life, you know, only God knows what truth is with a capital T or justice with a capital J. With humans, most of the time there are two sides, you know, to everything. And the other person, if you have your own truth, that doesn't mean that the other person's ideas are false. They have their own truth. You know, if what you think may be just or right is just and right for you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that is just or right for the other party. And we have to coexist as human beings. So our trial system, you know, it's sort of like what they said about democracy. You know, it used to be, we'd say, you know, our trial system is the worst possible method of resolving disputes, except for all the other ones. And now, you know, I've come to believe that mediation actually is a better means of resolving disputes than going to trial. You know, trial should be the absolute last resort if the parties absolutely can't find any kind of common ground to come and resolve things. Then they have to turn it over to a third party, a judge or a jury, to make the decision. But if they can find a means to collaborate, cooperate, listen to the other side and listen to their truth, and understand that it may not be your truth, but there may be a common point in between that you can get to somewhere where you can have some coexistence. And that just, that's how the world works better. That's how humans work better. And we can, because we all do, at the end of the day, we all do have to live together.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm a filmmaker and I studied storytelling. And then when I came to mediation, I was like, oh, on one hand, I learned how to build stories, but in mediation, you decompose those stories and you rewire them in a much more acceptable way. Somebody was saying that basically as mediators, we're giving meaning through a story that's acceptable on both sides. It's not necessarily the story that the other side wants, but it's somehow like a more acceptable narrative. And that's very interesting for me. Okay, so the magic of video editing just happened. We're 6 weeks actually later than our first recording. Today is Tuesday, December 22nd. And we're back continuing our discussion on mediation. And I'd like to ask you, Glenn, because we have a new president-elect, how do you see the connection between mediation and leadership?
Well, in a certain respect, I think we're going to see a change in approach that's more toward a mediated model in the sense that, like a lawsuit is an adversary proceeding where usually one side's going to win, the other side's going to lose, and it's and there are sides. In a mediation, of course, it's intended to be a collaborative process, and I think at least as the new president-elect Joe Biden has indicated, he's going to try to engage in a more collaborative approach with the other side and try to cooperate and compromise in achieving solutions to the problems that we're facing. So I would guess it sounds like the new administration intends to use a more mediated type of model, a collaborative model in governing. We'll see how that turns out.
I hope it's going to turn out well, and we're becoming more and more important, I would say, as mediators, of course. So to wrap this up, I would like to have first question how people can reach out to you and where can we find out more about your practice. And then I have a rapid fire of like 5 quick questions to make it fun.
Sure. Well, the first thing is people can reach me through the Beverly Hills Bar Association mediation section. I'm a member of our approved mediator panel. Secondly, my personal website is Glenn with 2 N's, Glenn, at GottliebMediation.com. My last name is spelled Gottlib, and then no spaces or periods, mediation. So Glenn at GottliebMediation.com.
Excellent. I hope people are going to check that website out. It's impressive. Your bio is impressive. And I hope I'm going to see you more on this podcast or webcast, whatever we're going to choose to do it in the future.
Happy to participate anytime.
Now, I would like to ask you 5 quick questions, the rapid fire as it's called, and see how we can end up on a fun note. So I would say by quick association, peacemaking is?
Peacemaking is satisfying.
It is satisfying. Conflict is?
Frustrating and counterproductive.
What is one thing you'll never do again in mediation? Or what would be one thing that you want to say that you should always do in mediation? Choose one.
Well, I'll say one thing I try to avoid as much as possible in mediation is insisting that I've got the right answer.
What's the best advice you ever received about mediating a conflict?
To try to take myself out of it personally and try to view more what the participants are going through. And in the case of a lawsuit, how a jury may perceive what's going on in the conflict as opposed to even a judge or me personally.
What is justice?
Only a concept. Mediation is about conflict resolution. It's not necessarily about justice. shall we say.
But is there justice out there? Can we achieve it?
That's a good question. I think justice is in the heavens, like truth with a capital T. You know, I don't know if humans are able to quite reach that. We can try for it, but that's a lofty ideal.
Well, at least we're trying. Glenn, thank you so much for all this. It was a pleasure to have this discussion with you. Thank you so much for your support and championing this new initiative. This is Mediators Talk with Beverly Hills Bar Association podcast, and this time on the webcast. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching us, and we're looking forward to have more mediators to talk to us. Thank you for the video and audio team that worked with us and helped us finalize this product. And I'm Carina Rosanna Tăutu. I'm your host, and I'm looking forward to more episodes. Thank you.